What's up, world? It's your boy Trey, retro underscore GT, back for another episode of the G.Taylor Show. Hope that your week has been well and your new year is smooth. Listen, I just recorded my first podcast of 2026. It's been probably 6 months since I actually recorded a podcast talking about my DSW journey. If you haven't listened to that, please go take a look at that real quick. Check it out. Kind of get into my last year, my final semester of my DSW journey. Check that out. So one of the things I want to talk about today is my topic, and I wanted to get into it, kind of a soft launch into it, and really kind of talk about some things that I've seen that I'm interested in. I'm from Caroline County, Virginia, super rural area. Even though it's growing now finally, and I have done a lot of work in the community, wherever that's, stop the violence events, mental health events, community-based events. I've coached rec league basketball. I've, grown up here. I've lived here. I've survived here. I went to the school systems here. I'm related to half the people here. My wife is related to half the people here. Have roots in Caroline County, right? And a lot of the work that I've done is in Caroline. I remember my first community event, Stop the Violence event, where we did some community conversations around the youth violence going on, and I really told myself when I got into social work that I really wanted to do work in Caroline, because it felt as if when I was growing up that everybody would just stay or come from Carolina and just leave and move out and never come back, only for funerals or birthdays or weddings, something like that, holidays, right? And I said I wanted to be committed to helping build my community up, and that's evolved over time, whether that's youth stuff, community based stuff, coaching, like really giving back to my community in meaningful ways. Now, haven't really had the opportunity to be employed by my county, but I've put my private practice in the county, right? For a few years, right? So that was one thing that I contributed back. Like I brought that community, business model back, and so now I think about other items that I was, thinking about doing going forward. I did the barbershop talks, and down here we were doing some of the Goodfellas stuff virtual here. Very entrenched into the basketball community as well, as much as I can be. Not should be more, but I do what I can, especially at the local gyms that we play ball at. I try to do most of my stuff, within the county, right? But of course, I work outside the county. I do a lot of my shopping outside the county most of the time. I try to stay local when I can, because I don't like driving out when I'm in the house. And so I bought my first house here in the county. I sold my first house here in Caroline County. And when I tell people where I'm from and I talk about like the things that I grew up and I didn't have, it's always like, what? Like, I say it's a shock. But for us who lived here, it's no shock. It's just, it's just life. We coming up, we didn't have access to, like, we only come like one high school, one middle school. For the last few years got a new elementary school. I tell folks I don't got street lights out here outside the neighborhood that I was in, but it got big pole lights out here for the field. You know what I'm saying? We didn't have high speed internet for quite some time until, maybe 2010, 2011, and still some areas in the county that does not have high speed internet, and they're working on it. They've been trying to get that happening, but it's always about houses and money and infrastructure. And so stuff like that comes up there, that people are inept to if you never lived in a rural area, don't know anything about rural areas. One of the things that I was not aware of when I was doing my research for my capstone project was the differences in rural areas. Now, for us, for the United States, really doesn't have a true definition of rural. But in kind of a generalized scope, it's those areas that are categorized as non-metropolitan, right? Non-metropolitan, pretty much the opposite of urban. And then there's a difference between, you know, like Southern rural, Northern rural, right? Midwest rural, Appalachian rural, like West Coast rural, like they all have unique factors and things, you know, that make them who they are. So like when I was thinking about doing rural, working with like talking about rural black men and things of that nature, like there's some areas that don't have, you know, high population of black men in those rural areas. Like um when I went to do a keynote out in Wisconsin, right, and looking at the nature of the black residents, I want to say it was like 9-10%, right, Wisconsin. And that's different compared to Virginia and Carolina in a sense, right? And so looking at how black men or black communities in southern rural areas have are more concentrated due to, you know, slavery, segregation, you know, things of that nature, and then people migrated out north, west, things of that nature. That's important to know because most folks have families and roots within the southern states. And southern rural looks different lifestyle wise for us in the black community than other areas. You know, not to say that things are still the same in these different areas, but I tell folks too, I grew up with the Confederate flag. Went to school with a lot of folks who wore the Confederate flag, whether on their, you know, clothes or, you know, had on their trucks, you know, things of that nature. I didn't know too much about it, or I knew there was a negative connotation with the flag, but really didn't get into it until, you know, later in my college years and really understanding, you know, Virginia, home of Confederacy, its role in it, you know, all those different things. And so, you know, that's just part of my culture, you know, growing up. Um, Even when we talk about like kind of shifting gears, we talk about sneakers or access to sneakers, right? We have the one for us in Carolina, Fredericksburg. We know we got the one main mall in Fredericksburg, you know, Spotsylvania Town Center or Spotsy Mall, right? But and at one point, I'm showing my age when we had like Foot Action and Finish Line in there and all those good stuff like that. You know, we got Detail R later, like, you know, sneakers, that's where we would get sneakers if you could, but we didn't get a lot of sneakers in the Spotsy Mall, unless I was mistaken. Um, High school, I used to go to Virginia Center Commons, also showing my age because Virginia Center Commons is no more. Virginia Center Commons had most of the sneaker stores, and in high school, we would go down there to get most of our sneakers. Um, Part of the time growing up outside of high school, outside of Spotsy Mall, some of those sneakers that you see right now, I didn't have access to because I was in this concentrated area or this set apart area. So when it came to, you know, that type of sneaker stuff, if I wasn't going north or south to get it outside of when, you know, maybe the 2010-ish, when stuff started coming more available, right? You know, I had to go out to get that thing, right? I remember vividly that those cool gray 11s, when they came out, the first year they came out, when I was in 8th grade, I remember seeing them and wanting them so bad. But nobody around here had them, right? And it wasn't until later on in life when they came out maybe like 2011, 2012-ish, that Christmas, that I was able to get it, I believe, from Sports Zone. Now, that's not the pair from Sports Zone, but that's for I'm showing my age again, Sports Zone from around the area. Shout out to my man's dad. Um, but but yeah, so, you know, some of these sneakers right here is about access now, and I can just go online and go onto an app and get up whatever sneaker I could. But back in the day, I couldn't do that, right? Because the proximity where I was at, right? We used to have shifting. We used to have access to Fred bus, which was a bus that used to come down and pick up folks to go to Fredericksburg or, you know, wherever they needed to go in those areas. Yeah, we stopped having that transportation. That wasn't like a big bus. That was like a smaller size bus to get folks there. But we don't have public transportation in Carolina, right? That's a big barrier. And we've never had public transportation outside that Fred bus, which was small in stature, and it wouldn't go to the other areas. It would pretty much be on the main road. It wouldn't go to the back roads, right? So when we talk about transportation or folks having, you know, the vehicles to get where they need to go, That's not, that's not where it needs. It's not here, right? Um, I was just thinking too, because as we're building up, like we got a food line here, which is a grocery store, local grocery store, mainly southern rural areas would have food lines. Most got whites now. But we didn't have that at first, right? Probably got it middle school time. That was about 2009, 98, 99. We had that shopping center. Somebody could fact check me for sure. But that wasn't there at first. And so we only had one food line, one grocery store that was in Bowling Green. And so for groceries, I remember vividly having to go out to Spotsylvania to Walmart when Walmart was on Route 3. That's for my local folks. Y'all remember Walmart was on Route 3, and you remember where Walmart in South Point that was nothing but trees. I'm showing my age. This is very localized kind of conversation, but you get the picture. So, we didn't have that access to those different things. So I think about like healthy eating or healthy food options, right? Outside of the farmers market that we have, you know what I'm saying? There's limited options for healthy food options. And then we're putting up new items to new places to eat, new places that will extend. But when we start talking about the grand scheme of health, right? Public health and healthy food items, like there's limited options. And so I say all that to say, right? Like, as I was writing and researching, I did not want to do anything with rural, but I realized that most of my work that I've been doing in the community, which is like, duh, Trey, you've been working in these spaces for quite some time, is all rural health, mental health, whatever, rural community related. So I've been doing that rural work. Why not continue to research it, bring some evidence into it, and to support it? And even down to the barbershop talks, when we was doing barbershop talks. Yeah, we did Spotsy, Fredericksburg, and Caroline. Spotsy was on the backside, going to the courthouse, was more a little rural. Fredericksburg, downtown Fredericksburg, of course, more town, and then Caroline for a while. Here up in the barbershop at Kurt's barbershop, Dice barbershop. So that was rural work being done. So I said, man, I need to just go focus in on rural. And I really understood. Then I started to understand all those different gaps. Things also, all the different, when I have conversations with folks from different areas, different states, especially my homeboys who live in different areas, different states, and we talk about our upbringings and what we had and what we didn't have, I realized how much some things like, that you didn't have that because of where your area and where you were at. And it was okay because it was normalized to me. It was fine by me. Like we talk about access to high speed internet, not having that till later on undergraduate, then having the satellite when the satellite first came out and everybody had the satellites, what I'm saying, stuff like that. So like there was different dynamics that were present, what I'm saying. Even the aspect of, like, I think talking to maybe Chris or Doc about this, like growing up with my great grandparents, right? And being around them and them raising me for, going on to maybe, 5, 6, 7, already get me off the bus to like 8, 9, right? And being around my great grandparents, big mom, big daddy, and having that community aspect to growing up and living. So like I thought that was normal for everybody, because everybody in my area, right, they had their big mom, big daddy, or they had somebody in the area that looked after them, right? And that was part of their family, extended family, and the extended community that would get them on the bus or put them on the bus, or, what I'm saying, take care of everybody like that. I thought that was normalized for everybody, right? But then I've had conversations with other people in different areas and locations. It's like, nah, I never knew my great grandparents. I never interacted with them. And I was like, wow, I've interacted with my great grandparents for up until maybe age 9, 10. And then I, interacted with my great uncles, great aunts, and my grandma, my grandfather, all the way up until, 25. You know what I'm saying? So that aspect of the community extended family piece looks different for us in this space, right? Even when I think about the barbershop talks and the barbershops and how that's shifted over time, where we have certain barbers here in the county that, you know what I'm saying, have created their own shops or their own independent spaces, but how that's changed and evolved over time versus your urban settings that, you know, have them in the city or the areas. And that looks different than what it would be addressing in those rural settings, even though it still serves the same purpose for brothers in the community. Like, the needs are different. So for those who are in, you know, more rural areas, right, that live on the back roads, that don't have public transportation, that don't have transportation in general, that might be, you know, struggling with trying to get around, that looks different for somebody that might be living in Richmond or the urban environment that could walk, has a sidewalk, and has some form of public transportation to get to where they got to go. That doesn't mean that they are better off, but there's an additional barrier for somebody that's living on this back road, right, that says, I need to get to town to go get a haircut or get to town to go see a doctor, but I'm stuck on the back road and I'm like 5-10 minutes, 10-15 minutes from Route 1, which is the main highway for us in Virginia, and I can't get to where I need to get to. And if I walk, I can walk the back roads, but I do put myself at risk of getting hit. You know what I'm saying? And maybe I can't walk. Maybe I don't have the capability to walk that long distance. That's not a actual thing that everybody can just do, whether that's due to disability or due to, you know, health reasons, right? And or just safety reasons, right? Because the back roads most of the times don't have lines. It's just one big back road, and you got to guide yourself going back and forth on the sides. So I really said, you know, I really want to get in depth with this rural aspect, whether that's specifically mental health or just healthcare in general. I grew up in these areas. I've been successful, I think, coming out of these areas. But I'm able to see the different gaps that are needed. Even when we talk about telehealth and working to make sure that folks get access to healthcare or to a medical provider or a mental health provider or a substance use provider, right? I think sometimes we assume that everybody has access to high-speed internet or a smartphone, or that everybody can work a smartphone and work the internet. I think we always think that everybody can work Zoom, the Zoom account. But these are actual things that are just not as commonplace or simple. I know a lot of folks who have smartphones who don't know how to work the smartphone. I know a lot of folks who don't have smartphones. Those folks who don't have access to high-speed internet, right? That have maybe still have some form of, you know, they're using a hotspot, you know, something that's slower and in depth. So it would not be able to stream the video over that. You know what I'm saying? So even like the telehealth access piece is still an ongoing thing, because if you drive enough, right, I can drive. So here's the thing. In my area, I can drive certain and hit certain back roads and take me to different parts of the state. I can go down my road right now and hit a back road and take me out to Charlottesville or Spotsylvania, right? Or I can go down to Hanover and get all the way to Richmond, right? I can go all the way across the county and take a highway that'll bring me into Mechanicsville and Richmond, or take me out to Tappahannock, right? Never hitting a main highway, but hitting straight back roads, right? You know, that's, and then as you go deeper into the back roads, there are people, it's not just, I mean, it's obviously it's wonderful land, it's wonderful scenery and things of that nature, but there are people still living in these areas on these back roads that are deep, deep, deep off the main highways, the main Route 1 highway and the main 95 highway. There are people that live in these different areas, right? So if they don't have access to getting their needs met, whether that's, you know, housing, medical, you know, clean food to eat, basic necessities of life, yeah, it's going to be tough to have a good quality of life. And let's say to not have a good quality of life, but quality of life looks different for those individuals who are deep in those settings and areas. And I think me personally, I think that the rural areas get forgotten about because it's just, oh, well, they're just, you know, they figure it out. You know what I'm saying? Oh, we can't get all the way back there, but we can get to the most accessible part of the community. And that's just usually closest to the main highways, right? What about the folks that's on the deep back roads? So even for me, like I'm about 10 minutes away from the main highway, and I like it like that, but I'm accessible. I have transportation. I have 3 vehicles. I have I'm able-bodied. I am savvy enough to, make things, happen and make that connection and get out there. You know what I'm saying? I can do those different things, but that's not the that's not everybody's, plight. And that's also not to say that these individuals who live in rural areas aren't innovative or creative and make ends meet somehow, some way. Yes, they do. They figure it out. They innovate. They create. So starting with trying to figure out how they have innovated to make ends meet or to make sure that their quality of life is sustainable is just as important as figuring out how to give them the tools and interventions to enhance and increase their quality of life. So that's my soft launch for my rural mental health campaign. I'm very intrigued by this process as somebody who has grown up, resided in rural areas, raised in rural areas, and continue to live in rural environments, and what needs to happen to address those barriers, those social determinants of health, those social determinants of mental health, and everything else in between. So I'm excited to present my capstone, excited to present my research based on the work that I've been doing around Southern rural Black men. And I do hope that it's a launching pad for other endeavors, especially related to rural health and mental health and public health, I would say, in that space. But yeah, so I just want to introduce that, kind of give a little bit of background from where I'm from, where I'm at, and what I'm headed to do with this work that I got going on, man. So hope that was informative a little bit, tells you a little bit about rural health, mental health. Had you thought about it? Had you explored it? What it looks like for you? Have you experienced that? What does that look like for you and your family if you ever experienced that rural health and mental health piece? But yeah, man, it's good to go on that side, man. So continue to like, share, subscribe to the podcast. We're on YouTube, The G.Taylor Show. Also, all your digital streaming platforms, The G.Taylor Show. Make sure you check in on that. And tell somebody about somebody and what we got going on over here. We'll see when the next episode drops, but I definitely wanted to get some episodes in before I start to get busy throughout this semester. All right. Take care. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon.